Hello and welcome to another podcast recording from Animal Training Academy. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Ryan Cartledge and I'm the director and founder of Animal Training Academy. This week we have a special treat and I am imagining our conversation is going to jump left, right, forward and backwards in regards to the diversity of species we will be discussing. Today's guest and I met at the ASZK, Australasian Society of Zookeeping Conference in Adelaide, Australia, just under 1 month ago. And for me, it was like finding a hidden gem, someone who lives so close, who has managed to acquire a set of experiences and roles that is truly remarkable. She has been working in the zoo industry for just over 10 years and is currently a senior zookeeper at Melbourne Zoo in Australia, working with primates, including western lowland gorillas, orangutans, baboons, mandrills, gibbons, and several other smaller primate species. She's always had a passion for animals, and it was a dream of hers to become an animal trainer ever since she was a small girl. So during her later years at high school, she started volunteering at her current place of employment, Melbourne Zoo. She ended up eventually spending a year working there as well once she had finished school, caring for the Asian elephants, Australian and sub-Antarctic fur seals, and a range of different bird species. She then spent the following 12 months at marine parks on the east coast of Australia, working with bottlenose dolphins, seals, sea lions, and Asian small-clawed otters. In 2007, she made the move to SeaWorld in Australia and stayed there for 4 years, adding even more species of seals and also penguins to her already impressive diversity of taxa that she had worked with. In 2011, she returned to where it all started at Melbourne Zoo and into the role she still has today. Her senior keeper role has her overseeing all animal training programs in the primate precinct. Not only has she been blessed to have worked in all the places I just mentioned, she's also volunteered at SeaWorld in San Diego, the Sumatran Orangutan Conservation Program, and at Cook Thong Endangered Primate Research Centre. She has disseminated all her acquired animal training knowledge to her colleagues at Melbourne Zoo, and in 2015 she attended several animal training workshops/seminars in the United States, as well as visiting numerous facilities. This was all made possible via an external fellowship provided to her by the International Specialised Skills Institute. Without further ado, it is my honour and very excited privilege to welcome one Bianca Papadopoulos to the show this morning. Very happy good morning to you, Bianca. How's everything over the ditch there in Melbourne today?
Good morning, Ryan. Thank you for that. It's pretty cold here in Melbourne this morning.
Now, Bianca, as I was saying, you attended this fellowship and you travelled to the States and you were very lucky and you got to go to all these workshops and meet all these amazing people as well as visit all these institutions. Part of the requirement of that fellowship is that you share your learning through educational mediums like this podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So I'm very grateful to be here this morning. So thank you for having me.
Ditto, and that gratitude goes both ways. I'm very grateful to have you here as well, as I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast is. And it's really cool. We're going to be hopefully talking about a lot of the things that you learned on your fellowship today, as well as throughout your career. But maybe just before we get going on that, do you want to just run us through a little bit more information about the experience that you had via this fellowship and the opportunities that it provided?
Sure can. So I'll just touch on what the International Specialised Skills Institute is all about, and I'll refer to it as the ISS. So it's an independent, non-for-profit national organisation providing opportunities for Australians to gain enhanced skills and experience through overseas applied research fellowships. So I went to the ISS and they allowed me to undertake an animal training fellowships, and my aims for the fellowship was to grow the skill set of myself. It was to learn alternative methods and develop new skills in the animal training field. I wanted to investigate the new techniques available in voluntary health training programs, and I also wanted to develop stronger relationships with the international community of animal trainers and keepers for future partnerships, nationally in Australia and also internationally. So whilst I was away, I investigated 5 different areas. I looked at the new techniques available in those voluntary health training programs. I wanted to learn about the methodology behind large social group training programs and how it is implemented. I explored how long-standing keepers have changed their mindset on animal training and adapted their keeping style to facilitate daily training sessions. The 4th one was I wanted to observe how research study training is conducted in conjunction with zookeepers and research scientists. And the last one was that Due to animal training being an aspect of behaviour science and it's constantly changing and developing, I wanted to discover the new advances in the science behind the training. So my fellowship program saw me attend Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago. I went to Shed Aquarium for a 5-day animal training seminar with Ken Ramirez. I then went to Disney's Animal Kingdom and Lodge in Orlando for the AZA Animal Training Applications Workshop. I attended Zoo Atlanta in Georgia, and then I finished up at Natural Encounters in Florida with Steve Martin and Susan Friedman for their Contemporary Animal Training Management Workshop.
And I feel that people listening to this podcast are just going to be sitting there going, wow, because that
was pretty cool. I'm not going to lie.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
And some really interesting areas, I think, that you identified. How did you kind of come up with those areas?
Definitely. It's really hard because obviously animal training being so big that I had to just pick a few areas to investigate rather than just having a broad spectrum. And I guess I based it around my experience at the zoo and what I was struggling with at the time. So being that I oversee all the animal training programs on primates, I really wanted to ensure that this fellowship, I gained a lot out of it. And those areas was what I was having problems with or coming up against hurdles around those areas at the zoo.
That's cool. And I think when you did your presentation at the conference, you kind of gave some statistics about the amount of zoos in America versus the amount of zoos in Australasia. And we have significantly few compared to the States. But I feel that even if I was a zookeeper working in the States, the experience that you gain from that fellowship would still be an amazing experience to have regardless of where you're from in the world. So from me anyway, it's really exciting to have you in the region. It's cool.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping that I can share my knowledge with anybody who wants to listen.
Yeah, and I think we have about 2,500 people on the Animal Training Academy mailing list anyway that are quite interested in what you have to say. Hey, we kind of talked about, me and you, Bianca, what we wanted to go through in this podcast, and we decided that we'll talk about all of these individual areas that you learnt about during this fellowship. So let's talk about the first one, which was in relation to new techniques in voluntary health training programs. Can you tell us about what you learnt about this during your fellowship and maybe any differences between what's going on in the US and what's happening in this region?
Sure. So what I learnt was that all the facilities that I visited, they place a huge priority on training the animals to participate in voluntary health training programs. Now, when I first started in the industry, I always wondered why they called it voluntary health, and it really took me a few years to understand this concept. So when you use positive reinforcement for a health training program and don't have to physically restrain the animal, either through the use of the exhibit infrastructure, I guess via a crush or something like that, or by keepers and vets having to physically restrain the animals have the choice to participate in the training session. So the animal could leave the trainer if they wanted to, but they didn't. And I guess I asked my question, why were they doing that? And I guess it was because of the strong positive reinforcement of that behavior and because of the trust the animal had with the trainer. The animal then volunteers its time to stay around for that health session. No matter if it's a blood sample, an ultrasound, or an x-ray, the animal stays. And I guess that's where they came up with that word, voluntary health training programs. So when I wrote the skill deficiencies, it was prior to my departure for the fellowship. It was a requirement by the ISS. They wanted to know what I was going to be looking at and researching while I was in America. I kind of regret using the words new technique because there's no real new techniques that they are using in the States that we're not in Australia. The technique that they are using is positive reinforcement. The advantages of having animals in a training program that supports voluntary health checks and exams far outweighs the old school way of not training animals and having to capture and restrain them for medical reasons. So whether it be a crocodile, a rat, an eagle, or a gorilla, all of these animals are getting trained through the use of positive reinforcement to assist with their own healthcare. So Zoo Atlanta, where I visited, have an outstanding training program that they've established with their gorilla group. It's probably one of the best in the world that I've personally seen. The keepers proactively train the gorillas for preventative methods, and the gorillas willingly participate in these voluntary health exams and procedures. So for those people that don't know, cardiac disease is the leading cause of mortality in Western lowland gorillas in the wild and in captivity. So monitoring disease remains a challenge to vets across all species of animals. Blood pressure monitoring, blood sampling, and cardiac ultrasounds can aid in the early diagnosis of cardiac disease. And all of these procedures Zoo Atlanta have trained their gorillas to do whilst being awake and participating in a session. So prior to them starting this voluntary medical training program, the zoo vets would have to anaesthetize the gorillas to obtain a blood sample or blood pressure reading and view the gorilla's heart through cardiac ultrasounds whilst the gorilla was anaesthetized. Now, they only did that every 3 to 4 years, so it was a long time between samples, especially if there was an animal that already had been diagnosed with cardiac disease and was on medication. So adjusting medication for the vets is extremely difficult to do without gaining those cardiac ultrasounds. So as you could imagine, only getting one every 3 to 4 years was quite difficult for the vets to manage. So it was seen by the zoo that there was no other choice but to train the animals for these procedures. So it enabled the vets to collect regular data samples and adjust the medications as needed. Now, the keepers told me a story that they had a sick orangutan a few years ago, and it wasn't sick enough that the vets decided to anaesthetize the animal. So it showed being lethargic and wasn't really interested in food. So the keepers and the vets decided to undertake a voluntary blood draw from the animal. They trained the animal to put its arm in a blood sleeve, and they were able to obtain the sample. Now, from that sample, the vets did detect the early stages of renal failure. Now, the vets commented that they probably wouldn't have anaesthetized the animal until the animal got a lot sicker and she was showing signs of renal failure. And in this case, she most likely wouldn't have survived by the time they had diagnosed it. So this is a perfect example of how important training the animals for voluntary health reasons are. They provided her with a better quality of life, which she may not have been around for. So it was really exciting to go over there and see what they were doing. So it really just highlighted the need for not just your apes, your typical apes, your marine mammals and your elephants to be in these programs, that all animals in our care should have the chance and opportunity to participate in their own healthcare.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely fantastic, Bianca. How did you feel being there and kind of seeing those procedures live in front of you and thinking back to the experiences that you've had throughout your career? And was your mind kind of buzzing with new ideas and applications, or did it kind of reinforce what you already know and just make your stance and your belief about the importance of these procedures more strong?
Yeah, look, it was a couple of things. It definitely did that. It definitely reinforced what I was already thinking and why it was so important. It gave me an opportunity to see how all different aspects of the zoo came together to, achieve these goals. It wasn't just the keepers training the animals for these procedures. It was the vets giving the keepers the training. It was the zoo's works department building the actual infrastructure, like the blood sleeves, they have to be ape-proof. So it was the welders that had made this mechanism. They'd gotten a local university on board to build this blood pressure cuff where, just like us humans, where it inflates and deflates. And it was really great to see that the zoo management had supported this and brought all these groups together to achieve one goal. So yeah, it was really inspiring.
Yeah, cool. And maybe just expand on that a little bit and tell the audience about how behavior isn't, and I'm just kind of sharing my thoughts here, but I'd like you to expand on this, Bianca, and tell me if you agree with it or not. How behavior management is so bigger than just animal training. It's like you just mentioned, a holistic approach to managing behavior and all those different aspects, the vets, the environmental arrangement, which was facilitated by the zoo's maintenance department, all the welders and stuff getting involved. Behavioral management is an accumulation of this huge picture of different elements coming into play to make it successful and to get these cooperative behaviors.
Oh, definitely, 100%. It was everybody working together, and some people see animal training as like an extra thing that, should be done only if keepers have time, and it's not really incorporated into their day. But animal training or animal behavior science is just as important as the nutrition that the animals get. It's just as important as the environment that the animals are in. So yeah, it was really great to see that they'd actually, stepped up to the plate and decided that it was so important. Ken Ramirez kind of puts the importance of animal training program. He believes that there's 4 cornerstones for a successful animal training program, and they're healthcare, which is the veterinary program that I was just talking about. It's nutrition is the second one, and the environment is the third third one, which includes the animal's social structures and the animals around that animal. And the fourth one is behavior management, which is your animal training and enrichment. So just like building a foundation, when you take one away, it's not going to stand up. It's going to fall apart. So there's not just one more important than the other. So there shouldn't be such a huge emphasis on the healthcare or just huge emphasis on the nutrition. It's a holistic approach, as you were saying, Ryan, and you should all look at those four cornerstones as equal.
I think that's beautiful. And it reminds me of the way Susan Friedman put it was, and she might have said this to you in your workshops, I'm not sure, but she kind of refers to it as a jigsaw puzzle, and all the different pieces of the puzzle have to kind of contribute towards the overall picture.
Yes, exactly.
Hey, fascinating. Just moving on, we'll move on to the next goal that you set for your fellowship, which was to learn about methodology behind large social group training programs and how they are implemented. Do you want to talk us through what you learned in regards to this?
Sure can. So I guess for me, coming from a marine mammal background and dealing with social animals such as primates was a huge challenge when I started because they're quite different. At Melbourne Zoo, for example, we currently have a troop of 20 baboons, and they have a hierarchy like you wouldn't believe. The lower ranked animals do not even try to take food from the keepers when the dominant animals are around. And then if you tried to separate them, the lower ranked animals didn't want to leave the dominant animals because it's their hierarchy and it's really complex. So I thought, where to from now? So Ken Ramirez in his workshop, he really provided me with some knowledge surrounding the methodology behind large social group training programs and how you train such a large group. So he stated that there was not just one answer to that question. It all just depends on the individual situation. Now, trainers should know their animals, not just the individuals, but also about their natural history. The social hierarchy and social interactions are continually changing and are extremely important. Trainers need to understand this, and they should know the ranking of that social group that they're working with, where the animal is in that hierarchy, and social ranking or states are the utmost important thing. He couldn't emphasize that enough. Now, the social reinforcers and the social punishers that come from that social group are far more reinforcing and stronger than anything that trainers have to offer. So knowing that individual animal is the key. So one approach to social group training is the one-on-one training, which probably we're all very familiar with. That is the ideal training situation, and it's where there is one trainer to one animal. So this would be unachievable if the exhibit didn't have enough spatial requirements and infrastructure to allow the animals to be individually separated. It might be feasible to get one trainer to feed most of the animals, whilst the other trainer works and trains one of the animals, but this is very hard to achieve, and still it's only one animal receiving training. Now, individual training may not always be the answer, because if the individuals could be separated, the animals may become stressed when they're separated. One-on-one may be a great theoretical idea, but sometimes with strongly bonded social groups, separating the animals just so the trainers can do one-on-one training may not make the most sense. If it's going to cause those animals to go into a panic because they don't know where their conpacifics are, trainers may need to review their plan and use a different technique. And that's exactly what I'm faced with our baboons at Melbourne. We don't have 20 individual spaces that we could separate all the animals in. And what I have found when I've had to separate certain individuals, they do become stressed when they're not with the rest of the group. So what do you do if separating the animals is not an option? Whether it's because there isn't the infrastructure to facilitate this, or whether it's because the trainer wants the group to stay together, or they may not have enough staff to do this. Now, Ramirez conveys that giving the animals structure and some place to go when it's time for a session is one of the biggest tips in dealing with social group training. He uses the following techniques to approach that situation, and that's mainly stationing, really, and it's broken into different categories. So there are several different types of stationing that can be trained with the animals in large social groups. By teaching an animal that there is a place that they are supposed to go where they can gain reinforcement, it gives structure to a big group of animals, and it can help bring order in such a large group. So one he uses location-specific stationing. Now, this is where every animal has a specific location in the training area that they are supposed to go to. So, for example, there may be 2 individuals on a rock, there may be 2 down by the fence line, there may be 4 on the ledge of the hill. So, to start this training, multiple keepers may be needed to start the sessions as the animals start to learn where to go. The trainer to the animal ratio can increase, and then start to approximate the trainers out until hopefully 1 or 2 trainers can undertake the session. The biggest biggest problem with this type of stationing is that if the animals were to move to a different exhibit or area, the training would have to start all over again, and it would only be applicable to that specific area. The second one that he talks about is position-specific stationing. So this is where each animal is in a position that is relative to each other. For example, seal 1 is always to the left of seal 3, and seal 2 is between seal 3 and seal 4, and seal 4 is always to the right of seal 2, if you kind of get my drift. It doesn't matter what the location is in any particular exhibit, wherever the trainer stands, the animal should line up in that specific order. Now, throughout time, the trainer may need to change the order due to that social hierarchy changings in the group. So with social groups that are constantly changing, position-specific stationing may not be the best option, which in my baboon trip that I'm dealing with at Melbourne Zoo, we have 2 young animals that are maturing and going to one day take over the group. So this probably wouldn't be the best idea for me because those 2 boys are constantly testing the other males in the group. However, animals do learn very quickly when there are changes. Sometimes the animals may have changed their locations and stayed that way for 3 sessions. Therefore, it is an indication to the trainer that something might be going on with the group dynamics and the positions may need to change. Now, the third area he talks about is target stationing. So this is where trainers teach every animal to target. Now, Ramirez suggests to use symbols, e.g. a circle for one animal, a square for another, a triangle for another animal. So by doing that, whichever trainer is holding their symbol, that is where the animal is to go. So if one trainer is going to work with 2 animals in one session, then they would hold those 2 target station symbols. The shapes or symbols become like a name tag for the animals that tells the animals where to go. Now, the benefit is the trainer can change the location of the session. The trainer, the animal, will start the session by looking for their symbol to understand where they're supposed to go. It can be a great way of providing variety for the animals. So I guess this one's really, I like this idea because if I was to do a session with the baboon troop at Melbourne, I could do one out on display for the public, or I could do one inside their night den areas, and it wouldn't matter because we would just hold a symbol each and then we would start our session. What he talks about is animal choice, and this is where the trainers give the animals the choice. Sometimes trainers can say it doesn't really matter where the individual animals are. The exhibit may be a mixed species exhibit, and then trainers can choose that one species of animal gets fed in this location while the second species gets fed in a different location. It's quite common in penguin groups when there's lots of different species of penguins. They decide that the king penguins are fed in this area by the rocks, the gentoos are fed down by the water, and etc. So therefore, it doesn't matter where the individual's location is in that group as long as they are in their species group. The fifth one is he calls it the shuffle. This is where it doesn't matter where the animals start the session. The trainer then shuffles the animals around to pick out individuals that they are going to undertake a training session with. So when undertaking this group training, which animals does the trainer reinforce first is one of the most common questions I've been asked and I hear a lot of trainers ask. And what order does the trainer feed the hierarchy? Does the trainer feed the dominant animal first? And the answer is it all just depends. It depends on a lot of variables, but also has to do with fairness. Now, there's a primatologist out there called Frans de Waal. In an experiment he undertook with a pair of capuchin monkeys, he housed them side by side in glass cages. And this is actually, I believe you can type it into YouTube and you'll be able to see some footage of this. So in return for handing a pebble back to the researcher, one of the monkeys receives a bland piece of cucumber, which she is happy to get. So the monkey gives them the pebble, she gets the cucumber and she eats it, and that's fine. Until she sees that her partner in the next space is rewarded for the very same task, a tasty grape. So when they go back and she gives it another try, but instead of a grape, she gets a cucumber again. This time she hurls the cucumber back at the researcher, rattles the cage, pounds the floor in an angry protest. So during de Waal's experiments, he said monkeys rewarded equally rejected the cucumber just 5% of the time. If their partners received a grape, however, they refused their lower payer rate of 50%. Now, when partners were given a grape for free without even having to pick up the pebble, the rejection soared. So in that experiment, there's an inequality happening that the animal perceives and it changes their behavior. So fairness is really an important concept, and Ramirez believes that the trainers have to be aware of how the animals perceive the work that they do. Even when trainers cue one animal to undertake a behavior and they have 2 other animals in the group that are not undertaking a cued behavior but just remaining at station, trainers should and must reinforce those two animals as well as the first animal for just sitting there and not doing anything. They all should get reinforced equally. So on the subject of which animal should get reinforced first in a social group training session, each situation is different and it depends on each individual group and the individuals within that group. So the dominant animal may be well trained and can wait to be reinforced last, or trainers may need to reinforce that animal first and then the other animals in the group. On the other hand, the dominant animal may not be used to training at all. It may be a fresh animal, I guess, and never been trained. So the dominant animal needs to receive reinforcement after any time trainers reinforce another animal. So dominant animal receives a treat, the second animal receives a treat, then the dominant animal receives another treat, the third animal receives a treat, the dominant animal receives a treat, and so on and so on. And the level of ability of the trainer has to keep the animals under stimulus control. So moving the animals and having them stationed further apart may stop the dominant animal leaving station and competing with other animals for food. The trainer should change their strategy depending on a lot of different factors and including on how well the animals are getting along. So really, it's a challenge undertaking social group training with animals. It's a very advanced skill. It requires good stationing. It requires practice. It requires teaching the animals to wait their turn. The training should support the group social structure. Teaching an animal to be patient and wait for reinforcement doesn't come naturally. What is natural for animals in the wild? Is it to compete with each other for food, to compete with each other for things that they want? So trainers have to teach them that they don't need to do this in their training session. The mistake that most trainers make is that the first time they start working with a large social group of animals, the goal of the session should not be to fight, and that should be the only goal. The trainers shouldn't care what else happens, but the mistake usually is that they do care. So they concentrate on the animals not fighting, not stealing each other's food, and teach them that if they do not do that, they're going to get heavily reinforced. The behavior that the trainers should be working on is getting along and shouldn't be a difficult, complex behavior to start with. So trainers can worry about how they are going to train more complex behaviors down the track, but the importance is getting a group of animals to work together. It's hard work and it needs to be reinforced well. Trainers need to teach them not to compete with each other, and that's something that is not going to come naturally to them.
That's amazing. So much information there, Bianca.
I know, sorry. I knew it was a really long one. So
no, it's perfect. And what you've said there was fascinating. And I'm going to go back and listen to it probably 3 or 4 times and then come back to you with questions. Because
it's a lot to take in at once. So you really, you have to pay attention and write different notes and really break it down, I guess.
It's a lot of information. So it's learning the information. And I always say, and tell me what you think about this, Bianca, you've got to learn the information. You've got to generate those new ideas. You've got to know the theory, but then you've also got to be able to apply it to your unique situation.
Definitely, 100%. It's all good, reading a book about training, but if you can't really apply it, then what's the use, really?
So that concludes part 1 of this 2-part podcast episode with Bianca Papadopoulos, Senior Primate Keeper in charge of primate training programs at Melbourne Zoo, Australia. I hope you have enjoyed the first half and make sure to tune in next week where we talk more about the science of animal training and introducing positive reinforcement training techniques to people that have been caring and working with animals over long careers. To listen to and/or download all previous podcast episodes, visit www.animaltrainingacademy.com, and on the website you'll also find the free 15-lesson training tidbits course. There's videos, written content, audio, PDFs and quizzes, all for free. It's my labour of love to all you fantastic people out there. We're also getting ready for Animal Training Academy's first year birthday celebrations. This will be happening in July. We will be doing something super special for that. The best way to stay up to date and informed about this is by joining the mailing list by hitting the registration button on the website, where you will be the first to find out about any news from the Academy and receive brand new content every week. As always, I would love to hear from you. Please leave your thoughts and comments at the bottom of the podcast write-up page. Tell us if you liked the podcast, if you didn't like it, and give us a bit of information about the animals you are working with. Good luck with all your training endeavours, and you'll hear from me again soon.